The hall of the Alien Council was wide and endless, with ceilings that rose like the sky, and walls carved with symbols from thousands of races, and every star in the chamber seemed to glow in silence as the members took their places, each one representing an empire that stretched across the galaxy. And yet none of them carried pride on their faces, because in the center of the room stood the object that had broken them all. The puzzle rested on a black stone pedestal. It was older than their oldest memories. It was older than their oldest myths. Some said it was left by the first ones, a race that shaped the stars and then vanished into shadow. The device was small and made of shifting pieces that moved without touch, glowing lines running across its surface like rivers of light, and every mind that had tried to master it had failed. The Kalari remembered how their brightest minds locked themselves away for 200 years and came back broken. Their empire never recovered from the despair. The Vathans told of their priests who prayed to the puzzle as if it were a god, only to lose faith when the silence of its secrets drove them to madness. The Othruan declared war upon their neighbors to steal new thinkers and new machines, yet not one of them found the key, and in the end their fleets burned and their homeworld turned to ash. Civilizations rose and fell, and still the puzzle remained. Each time it appeared it promised greatness, and each time it delivered only ruin. No one knew why the puzzle called to them, but it always did, and now it sat again before the council, daring them to try once more. The council chamber was heavy with silence when the Grand Speaker's voice echoed like thunder, declaring that the puzzle was unsolvable, that no empire, no matter how vast, no mind, no matter how brilliant, had found the answer, and so it should be left untouched, sealed away forever. Yet not all agreed, for some whispered that within the puzzle was power beyond imagining, that if unlocked, it would grant knowledge enough to rule the galaxy. Pride clashed with fear as the members shouted across the chamber, their voices rising like storms. The proud ones demanded another chance, the cautious ones begged to destroy it before more lives were lost, and beneath the great debate the puzzle continued to glow, quiet and patient, as if it listened, as if it waited. At the far end of the chamber sat one figure, unnoticed, small among giants, a human observer sent not as a voice, but as a shadow. The human had no seat at the council, no vote, no power, and yet the eyes watched the puzzle with calm interest. Unlike the others, the human did not argue, did not shout, did not bow in reverence, only watched as if seeing something the others missed. The council turned their fury upon one another, and every word was heavy with old wounds. The Xylari accused the Drath of sabotage. Long ago the Drath shouted back that the Xylari had stolen their scholars. The air was thick with anger and fear, but still the puzzle remained untouched, glowing softly with lines of blue-green and silver that twisted and turned like living streams. In every corner of the chamber memories haunted the council. They remembered the empire that tried to force the puzzle open with machines and fire, only to have its core explode and wipe a star from the sky. They remembered the countless seekers who wasted lifetimes drawing maps of symbols, chasing patterns that never ended, and they remembered the silence of the puzzle mocking them each time they thought they were close. Now it was here again, in the heart of their power, and none dared approach. The Grand Speaker lifted a hand commanding silence, and his words fell heavy, declaring that this object had destroyed too many lives, and that it would be locked away in the vaults beyond time. But even as the order was spoken, many felt their hearts twist, because the puzzle pulled at them the way a flame calls to the moth. And so the chamber was filled with two truths, one spoken, one unspoken. The spoken truth was fear, the unspoken truth was desire. Every eye returned again and again to the glowing object, its light reflecting in alien eyes filled with both dread and longing, and though none would admit it, each of them wished to be the one who solved it. Each of them dreamed of being the first mind to see the answer. And still the human watched, quiet and thoughtful. The council did not see the small smile at the corner of the human's mouth, for where they saw madness and despair, the human saw something else, something simple, something waiting to be understood. The council rose from their seats, their voices echoing through the hall, their arguments endless, their pride wounded by centuries of failure, and as they shouted the puzzle glowed brighter, as if aware that a new chapter was about to begin. The chamber of the Alien Council shook with voices as pride clashed with fear, each delegate rising to defend the honor of their people, while the puzzle glowed quietly in the center, as if it cared nothing for the endless storm around it. And yet every voice carried history, every word carried memory of failure. The Xylari speaker lifted his many arms and thundered that his kind had come closest, for they had mapped every symbol, they had traced every line, and they had filled whole libraries with patterns that almost made sense. He claimed that if given more time, they would have solved it. But their rivals had sabotaged their efforts. They had sent spies and thieves to disrupt their scholars and steal their notes, and so the secret had been lost. The Drathian delegate rose with burning eyes and accused the Xylari of lying. They shouted that the Xylari had never been close. They had been desperate fools chasing illusions, while the Drath had uncovered something real. They said the puzzle was not about numbers or maps, but about sound. For when their singers hummed to the glowing device, the lights pulsed back in rhythm. They believed it was a song waiting for the right voice, but their singers had been silenced by war before the final harmony could be found. The Kalari voice came next, deep and heavy with sorrow. Their people had paid the greatest price. Their empire had broken under the weight of obsession. Their leaders had forced their brightest minds to work day and night. They had filled great towers with machines. They had poured oceans of energy into the puzzle, but the device mocked them with silence. And when the answer never came, the empire tore itself apart. The Kalari said they would never again touch the cursed object, for it carried only death. Others rose, the Vathans with their priests, who once believed the puzzle was divine and had prayed for centuries only to be abandoned. The Othruan, who enslaved whole races to think for them only to find the minds burned away. The gentle theory, who had once thought it a test of patience and had meditated before it for generations, until their race forgot why they had even begun. And all of them spoke with wounded pride. All of them refused to accept that they had truly failed, for to admit that was to admit weakness, and none of them could do that before the council. The chamber filled with the sound of old arguments and old pain. Every delegate shouted louder than the last, each trying to drown the shame of centuries with words. The grand speaker slammed his staff against the floor, demanding order, but the storm would not calm, for pride was stronger than reason. High above the chamber, the puzzle continued to shift faintly, its glowing lines weaving and breaking like rivers of fire. None noticed the patterns changing with each shout. None noticed that the lights pulsed in rhythm with their anger, as though the device itself fed on their pride and failure. The human observer sat quietly still, a shadow among giants. The human listened to every voice, to every story of arrogance and despair. Unlike the others, the human did not carry the weight of past failure, for humans had never touched the puzzle before. The human only saw what was before them, a glowing device, ancient and waiting. The council finally turned their anger away from one another and toward the object itself. The grand speaker declared that the puzzle was not a gift, but a curse. He said it had been placed in the galaxy to break pride, to lure civilizations into ruin. He called it a weapon of the vanished first ones and demanded that it be sealed away for all time, placed beyond reach, so no species could fall again. The hall shook with disagreement. Many shouted that to seal it away was cowardice, that their ancestors had died chasing the answer, and their sacrifice would mean nothing if the puzzle was locked forever. Others argued that to keep trying would be madness, that already too much blood had been spilled, that the puzzle itself was laughing at them with every generation that failed. Pride would not allow them to agree. One by one, each delegate rose to speak of their people's greatness. Each demanded another chance. Each claimed that their wisdom and their methods were superior. And as they did so, the human noticed the same flaw in every voice. They all believed the puzzle demanded greatness, but none thought it might require something else. The Xylari brought forth a fragment of an ancient scroll, claiming it showed the hidden key. The Drath produced recordings of their singers, believing the tones could awaken the device. The Kalari revealed broken machines from their old empire, desperate relics of obsession, and every species tried to prove they had been closest. Every species tried to prove they had not failed. The hall became a gallery of arrogance, ancient tools, ancient theories, ancient memories, piled before the glowing puzzle, as if mountains of failed pride could force it to reveal its heart. The device glowed brighter, its lines swirling faster, like storms of light across its surface, and still none dared to touch it. None dared to place their hands upon it, for fear of repeating the madness of their ancestors. The grand speaker raised his voice above them all, demanding silence. His words cut through the noise like blades. He told them that the council could not waste another age fighting over this, that the galaxy needed unity, not obsession, that the puzzle had already destroyed too many, and would destroy more if they allowed it. Yet even his voice shook with something deeper, with the pride of one who wished to be the savior, who locked away the danger forever. The silence that followed was heavy. Every delegate stared at the puzzle with eyes of fire and longing, none willing to surrender, none willing to admit defeat. They would rather see their rivals fail again than accept the truth that none of them understood it. And in the quiet shadow of the hall, the human finally spoke. The voice was small compared to the thunder of alien tones, but it carried across the chamber like a thread of calm. The human asked a simple question. Why had none of them tried to look at the puzzle without pride? Why had none of them treated it not as a weapon or as a key to power, but as a question? The chamber froze. Every alien turned their eyes upon the small figure, their stares heavy with disbelief. Laughter broke out first from the Otheran delegate, cruel, sharp laughter. They mocked the human. As foolish, they said the puzzle was not for children, not for young fragile species barely born into the stars. The Dreth joined the laughter, saying that humans had no ancient empires, no endless wisdom, no scars deep enough to understand the weight of the puzzle. But the human did not shrink back. The human did not lower their gaze. The human simply repeated that perhaps the puzzle was not meant for greatness, but for simplicity. Perhaps it was not about who was the strongest or the oldest, but who could see without the cloud of arrogance. The chamber roared with anger. The grand speaker struck the floor again and again, demanding silence and order, but the voices of the council crashed like storms, drowning the humans' words in waves of pride. They shouted that humans were nothing, that their kind was too small to understand, that they had not suffered the way the great empires had suffered, and so they had no right to speak of the puzzle. The chamber had been a storm of voices, but now it sank into uneasy silence, for the human had spoken, and though most of the council dismissed the words as nothing more than foolish noise, a seed had been planted, one that none of them could ignore completely, and the puzzle itself seemed to glow brighter, as if it had heard something it had been waiting for across countless ages. The grand speaker raised his staff once again, and declared that no more time would be wasted on the matter. He declared that the puzzle would be sealed within the vaults of infinity, guarded by machines that never slept, so that no race would ever again fall to the madness of chasing its secrets. The council nodded, though some faces burned with shame and others with stubborn hunger for the answer they could never find. But then the human stood up from the shadowed corner. The figure was small compared to the towering forms of the aliens, but the voice carried clearly across the hall. Calm and steady, the human asked for permission to try the puzzle just once. The chamber erupted again, this time with laughter. The Draft laughed first, sharp and cruel, saying that the human was a child playing at wisdom. The Otheran followed, calling humans a race still crawling among the stars, with ships no older than the council's archives. The Kalari, who had once lost everything to the puzzle, simply shook their heads in weary pity, and said that humans did not understand the curse they were asking to touch. The grand speaker's eyes narrowed. The great alien leaned forward and demanded to know why the human believed they could do what no empire had done across thousands of years, why they thought their fragile mind could succeed where billions had failed. The human did not boast, did not shout, but only said that they wished to try, not with machines, not with arrogance, but with eyes open to what it really was. The silence that followed was heavy, for the words were not those of pride, but of curiosity, something rare in that chamber of broken empires. Some of the council scoffed, but others leaned forward, their eyes narrowing not in anger, but in something closer to wonder, for none of them had heard such words spoken before. The Otheran delegate spat venom, saying that to hand the puzzle to a human was insult, that it would dishonor the sacrifices of every empire that had bled for the answer. But the Vathan priest raised a trembling hand and whispered that perhaps it was fitting that an outsider should try someone unburdened by the scars of failure. Perhaps that was what the puzzle had been waiting for. Arguments broke once again, voices crashing like waves. Some demanded to cast the human out at once, some demanded to lock the puzzle away forever, and a few whispered for the chance to see what might happen if the human touched it. The puzzle pulsed brighter with each new word, its shifting lights spilling across the floor like rivers of silver and gold. The grand speaker finally struck the floor, and the thunder of the staff silenced all. He declared that the idea was madness, that the council would never lower itself to hand the object of empires to a species so young. Yet even he hesitated, for the eyes of the assembly were changing, and many of them no longer glowed with only anger. Now they glowed with curiosity and the hunger of seeing something new after endless failure. At last the council voted. The chamber shook with the sound of the decision, and though the choice was not without fury, it was made. The human would be allowed a single attempt. If they failed, the puzzle would be locked away forever, and the matter would never again be spoken of. The grand speaker agreed with bitterness, saying that the human would prove nothing, and that their failure would finally silence all whispers of hope. The pedestal of black stone rose higher, so that the puzzle shone like a small sun in the center of the chamber, its surface alive with flowing symbols that danced like water. The glow touched every face of the council, casting long shadows. Across the walls, the human walked slowly toward it, each step echoing in the silence of the hall. The council watched with eyes filled with disbelief and dread. Some whispered that the human would die, some muttered that the device would burn their mind from within as it had done to others in the past. Still others watched in secret hope, yearning for the chance to learn what the human might see. The human stood before the puzzle, their reflection caught in its glowing surface. Hands hovered above the shifting lines, and for a moment the hall held its breath. The human did not rush, did not chant formulas, did not summon machines. They simply observed, tracing the movement of the lights with their eyes, watching the flow, as if it were a simple stream in a quiet forest. Memories flooded the council unbidden. They remembered their ancestors breaking themselves upon the puzzle with calculations so vast they filled planets with stone. They remembered armies, forced to labor in silence, building engines to tear it open. They remembered prayers, cried into the void unanswered, until faith turned to ash. And now here stood a human, without fear, without burden, without pride, simply looking. The human placed their hands upon the glowing surface, and the hall gasped, for no one had dared to touch it without machines. In countless centuries the lights flared, and for a heartbeat it seemed as if the chamber itself was breathing. The puzzle shifted beneath the human's touch, pieces sliding like gentle tides, symbols aligning not with the violent force of engines, but with the calm of hands that moved with patience and quiet thought. The council leaned forward, their voices hushed. The Kalari whispered that it was impossible. The draft growled that it was trickery. The Vathan priest trembled with hope, and the Offeran stared with narrowed eyes, burning with both hatred and fear, for in mere moments the human had done what their empires had failed to do. They had awakened the first movement of the puzzle. The lights flowed brighter and brighter as the puzzle unfolded, like petals of a flower blooming for the first time in ages. The council's pride shuddered beneath the weight of the sight, for they had claimed the puzzle was unsolvable, and yet a human touched it, and it moved as though it had been waiting. Still the humans said nothing. Still they did not boast. Their hands traced the shifting lines, their eyes followed the patterns with calm focus, and the council felt the air change around them, felt as if the ancient chamber itself held its breath, watching. The Grand Speaker rose in fury, demanding that the trial be ended, declaring that the human's touch was a violation, that they were twisting the sacred relic. But even as he spoke, the glow spread brighter, until his words were drowned in light. The puzzle pulsed, once more, symbols aligning with a grace that defied the ages. And as the light spilled across the council chamber, every member was forced to see the truth, for the puzzle that had broken civilizations had moved in the hands of a human. And though the final answer was not yet revealed, the storm of pride that filled the chamber began to crack. For the first time in memory, the puzzle was no longer silent, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The humans stood before the glowing puzzle, their hands resting on the shifting surface, the light rising and falling like the slow breath of something alive. The council sat frozen in silence, their many eyes wide with disbelief, for they had seen with their own sight the puzzle move in the hands of a creature they had all dismissed as weak and unworthy, and now every soul in the chamber felt the weight of history pressing against their pride. The Grand Speaker tried to command his voice to thunder across the chamber, but the words came out thin, for even he could not deny what his eyes revealed. He shouted that it was a trick. He shouted that no true movement had been made, that the device was only reacting to contact. But the light in the puzzle seemed to mock him as it pulsed brighter with every calm motion of the human hand. The Kalari whispered among themselves, their voices shaking with memories of the ruin their empire had suffered. Their greatest minds had driven themselves to madness, and yet this quiet human touched the puzzle with nothing but ease. The Vathan priest pressed trembling hands together and whispered that perhaps the ancient gods had chosen the human, perhaps the trial of ages had been waiting for them. The Offeran snarled with rage, for they could not accept that a small young race could achieve what their mighty fleets and enslaved minds could not. The human ignored the voices around them. Their focus was entirely upon the flowing lines within the puzzle. Their eyes saw not the impossible weight of history, not the arrogance of 1,000 empires, not the curse of obsession. Instead, they saw shapes repeating, they saw patterns moving like waves, they saw something alive and simple, something beautiful rather than cruel. The glowing lines twisted into circles and spirals, then broke apart and formed again. Many times the alien minds had seen this before and thought it was chaos, but the human tilted their head as though listening to a quiet song, and with one hand they guided a piece into place, not with force, not with calculation, But with gentle trust, the chamber gasped as the puzzle responded, shifting into harmony. The human's memory stretched back to small things that no alien would ever think important, to the games of childhood, where puzzles were not about power, but about play, to the drawings of rivers and trees, where shapes flowed together in natural order, to the act of seeing the world as story rather than code. And so the human did not treat the puzzle as a lock or a weapon. They treated it as if it were a story told in light, waiting to be read. The council leaned forward, each delegate caught between horror and wonder. The draft hissed that it was impossible. They declared that no puzzle of the first ones could be solved by instinct alone. Yet even as they spoke, the device shifted again, its glowing rivers folding together into a new form that none of their scholars had ever seen. The grand speaker gripped his staff with shaking hands, his pride trembling at the sight. The human traced a finger across a glowing line, watching it bend toward another, and for the first time the council saw something they had never seen before. They saw the puzzle respond as if it understood not only the touch, but the intent behind it, as though the device had waited for a being who did not force it, who did not fear it, who only wished to listen. The Kalari delegate whispered that they had built machines to hammer the puzzle open. The author muttered that they had used slaves to push it day and night. The Vathan priest confessed they had begged the stars for answers, but none of them had ever thought to simply watch and listen. None of them had ever thought to let the puzzle tell its own story, and now the truth cut through their pride like a blade. The light in the device spread further across the floor, painting the chamber in rivers of blue and green. Symbols rose into the air, glowing like floating stars. The human moved with calm patience, guiding them into place, and with every motion the council felt centuries of arrogance crumble within them, for they had always believed greatness was the key, and now they saw that humility opened the first door. The grand speaker tried once more to end the trial, shouting that the human must stop, shouting that the puzzle was dangerous, shouting that it could still destroy them all. But his words sounded weak against the quiet glow of the unfolding device's voice was no longer thunder, it was dust carried by the wind, and though some nodded in fear, many others watched with hearts that dared to hope. The human stepped back for a moment, studying the glowing structure, now half-open pieces aligned into flowing patterns, like the wings of some great creature. Symbols formed words in a forgotten tongue, though the human could not understand them. The sight alone carried a feeling of meaning, a sense that this puzzle was never a curse, but a message left waiting for one who could see beyond power. The chamber was utterly silent, every alien afraid to even breathe, lest they disturb the fragile miracle unfolding before them. Even the Othran, who burned with rage, could not look away, their hatred trapped in awe, for no matter how much they despised the truth, they could not deny what they saw. The puzzle was yielding to human touch. The human placed their hand upon the glowing surface again, their eyes steady, their voice calm. They whispered that it was simple. They whispered that it was not about strength or knowledge or endless time. It was about seeing what was already there and moving with it rather than against it. Though most of the council could not understand the words, they felt the weight of them. They felt their pride tremble. For centuries they had all believed the puzzle was impossible because it demanded too much from them. Yet now they saw that the puzzle was impossible because they had demanded too much from it. They had forced it to be a weapon. They had forced it to be a prize, when it had always been nothing more than a question, and the human had answered it by listening. The glow rose higher, filling the chamber with radiant light, until the walls seemed to vanish, and only the puzzle and the human remained. The council sat in shadow, watching as history bent before their eyes, and though none would speak it aloud, each of them felt the same thought growing in their hearts. If a human could do this, what else could they do? The human smiled softly, not in triumph, not in arrogance, but in quiet understanding, and placed the final piece of the pattern into place. The puzzle pulsed, once more a heartbeat that shook the chamber, and then it opened. The chamber was filled with blinding light as the puzzle shifted beneath the hands of the human. The symbols, once thought chaotic, now aligned with elegance. The glowing rivers bent into place as if they had been waiting for this moment since the dawn of ages. The council sat frozen, unable to move, unable to speak, their pride heavy upon them, yet their disbelief heavier still. The grand speaker clutched his staff so tightly that cracks formed along its surface. His voice rose in fury, shouting that it was impossible, that no creature, no mind, no race could break the puzzle in mere moments. Yet the puzzle itself gave no heed. The device unfolded its hidden layers, the patterns flowing outward like a blooming flower, spreading light across the chamber walls, until even the most stubborn eyes could not deny the truth. The Kalari delegate felt silent tears glimmering in their many eyes, for they saw in that glow the waste of their ancestors, who had given lifetimes to a path the human walked in minutes. The draft muttered curses under their breath, rage thick in their voice, for their songs had only awakened echoes, while the human revealed harmony. The Othruan could only stare, their pride shaking with hatred, for they had enslaved worlds to force answers, and now one fragile human broke the curse with calm simplicity. The puzzle pulsed again, and the floor trembled beneath the council. The human did not flinch. They guided the glowing lines into place, with hands steady as stone. Every motion followed a rhythm unseen by alien eyes, a rhythm that was not numbers, not power, but story, a story hidden in the folds of light, now revealed at last. The council leaned forward, drawn by awe even as their pride shattered. Symbols floated above the device, glowing words of a language long forgotten. They formed constellations of meaning, shapes of unity, balance, and life. The Vathan priest gasped, falling to their knees, whispering prayers of thanks, for though they could not read the words, their heart knew they were sacred. They were not curses, they were not warnings, they were truths left as gifts from the first ones. The Grand Speaker roared that it was blasphemy, that the human was twisting the sacred artifact for their own trick, but his words faltered as the device itself rose from the pedestal, glowing brighter than the star symbols flowing around the human like rivers of light. The chamber itself hummed with power, and the council knew the truth. No trick could command such majesty, no fraud could awaken the silence of millennia, only truth could. The human looked around the chamber, their eyes calm and steady. They did not speak of triumph, they did not boast. They only said that the puzzle was never meant to be broken by strength, that it was never meant to be forced open like a lock. It was meant to be understood, and once understood, it opened freely. The council sat stunned, some in awe, some in fear, some in shame. None could deny that the impossible had been done, and that it had been done not by the proud empires of the galaxy, but by a human who saw with simple eyes. The Othruan delegates slammed their claw against the floor, demanding that the trial be stopped. They shouted that the human should be punished, that the puzzle should be taken back before more damage was done. But even as they raged, the puzzle completed its unfolding, the last lines sliding into place with gentle grace, and then it opened fully. The chamber was filled with light brighter than any star, yet soft like dawn. The council shielded their eyes, but the human stood unflinching within the glow. Symbols flowed into the air, weaving together into vast shapes, galaxies, rivers, worlds, all drawn in light. The chamber felt larger than space itself as the puzzle revealed its heart. A voice filled the chamber, not sound, not language, but meaning that poured into every mind at once. The council gasped as they understood the message, though no words were spoken. It was as if the puzzle had waited all this time to tell them a truth too simple for their pride to accept. The meaning was unity, it was perspective, it was the reminder that greatness was not the path to answers, but humility, that the galaxy had wasted ages trying to prove power, and in doing so had blinded itself to the truth. The puzzle had been placed not as a curse, not as a weapon, but as a lesson. Only a species that saw without arrogance could hear it. The Kalari bowed their head in shame. The Vathan priest wept openly. The draft growled, but could not deny the tears burning in their eyes. And even the Othruan, who hated the human with all their pride, felt the weight of the message pressing upon them. The Grand Speaker's voice cracked as he demanded to know what this meant, demanded to know why the first ones would leave such a riddle behind. But the answer was already within the message. The lesson was not for those who sought to rule, it was for those who sought to understand, and the human had proven worthy, simply by asking, not with arrogance, but with curiosity. The light began to fade, the puzzle settling back onto the pedestal, now open, its glow soft and steady like the last embers of a dying fire. Yet those embers carried warmth. The chamber no longer felt cursed, it felt healed. The silence that followed was not heavy with pride, but filled with awe. The council could not find their voices, their pride broken, their arrogance shattered in the face of the truth. They had failed across ages, not because the puzzle was impossible, but because they had never thought to look at it with eyes unclouded. The human had done so, and now the galaxy would never forget. The humans stepped back from the pedestal, their hands falling to their side. They did not smile with victory, they only nodded quietly, as though the act had been simple, as though the puzzle had never been impossible at all. And in that moment the council knew fear, for if humans could solve what none of them could, then perhaps humans were not the weak young race they had believed. Perhaps they were something far more dangerous, something far more extraordinary. Whispers filled the chamber, soft at first, Then growing the words, passing from one delegate to another, what else could humans do if they could solve this? What other secrets could they unlock? What other powers could they awaken? And none dared speak the thought aloud, but all felt it. If a human could break the puzzle instantly, then perhaps they could change the galaxy forever. The Grand Speaker lowered his staff, his eyes dark with dread, for he knew the truth, that this moment would be remembered not as the triumph of the Council, but as the beginning of humanity's rise. And though he wished to deny it, he could not, for the proof glowed upon the pedestal. Before them the unsolvable puzzle cracked instantly by human hands. The chamber of the alien council lay in a silence deeper than the void outside the stars, for the puzzle that had mocked civilizations for ages now stood open, its glow soft but steady, its secrets no longer hidden. The council stared at the shapes of light still floating in the air, shapes of galaxies and rivers and stars woven together into a tapestry of meaning. The humans stood calmly before it, their face unshaken, while every alien eye followed the lines of radiance with a mixture of fear and awe. The Vathan priests trembled as they raised their voice, whispering that the puzzle was no weapon, but a message left by the first ones, a message waiting for someone humble enough to see it. And now the message poured into every mind like water filling an empty vessel. There were no words, only understanding, each thought arriving clear and unshakable. The message told of the first ones not as gods, not as tyrants, but as travelers who walked among stars long before any living race had taken its first step. They had built wonders. They had shaped paths of knowledge across galaxies, but they had also seen the danger of pride. They had seen that power without humility would lead only to ruin, and so they left the puzzle not to grant power, but to remind those who followed that wisdom came not from conquest, but from perspective. The Kalari bowed their heads in shame, remembering their ancestors, who had broken themselves trying to tear the device open with machines. The Drath clenched their fists, their memories filled with singers who had burned their voices, chasing harmony. The Othran turned away, their eyes filled with hatred, not only for the human, but for themselves, for they had enslaved countless races to force answers, and now they saw the truth had never belonged to power, it had belonged to understanding. The human lifted their hand, pointing toward the tapestry of light symbols forming a spiral that stretched outward like the birth of a galaxy, and though no sound came from the puzzle, the meaning was clear: unity, not dominance; cooperation, not rivalry; the strength of many, not the pride of one. The council shifted uneasily, for their chamber had always been a place of argument and division, but now the message demanded something they had never given. The Grand Speaker rose, his voice heavy with anger. He shouted that the message was a lie, that it was a trick to weaken them, that the first ones had been rulers, and that the puzzle was a chain meant to bind them. But even as he spoke, the light pulsed gently, and the meaning pressed deeper into every mind. Truth carried weight that no denial could shake. The Grand Speaker's words rang hollow against the clarity that filled the chamber. The theory delegate, who had been silent for most of the debate, now spoke, their voice calm and sorrowful. They said their ancestors had meditated before the puzzle for generations, waiting for wisdom, and now they saw that the wisdom had always been there, but their pride had blinded them to it. They turned their gaze to the human and bowed low, their voice trembling as they thanked them for opening what none of them could. The council shifted, restless, each delegate caught between fear and admiration. None could deny the human had done what no empire had achieved, yet to accept it meant to admit their failure. It meant to admit that the youngest race among them carried something greater than all their power. To the Kalari whispered that perhaps the human's gift was not brilliance, but humility. Perhaps that was why the puzzle had answered to them. The Othran delegates slammed their claw against the floor, their pride burning. They shouted that this was dangerous, that humans could not be trusted, that if they could unlock such secrets, then they could one day claim the stars themselves. The Drath joined in, their voices bitter. They said that humans had no right to hold wisdom meant for all, yet even as they shouted, they could not erase the truth shining in the chamber, the truth that the puzzle had chosen the human. The human spoke then, their voice quiet but carrying clearly. They said the message was not theirs alone, it was for everyone. They said the puzzle did not belong to humanity or to the council, but to all who could see its meaning. They told the council that the lesson was simple, that power blinded those who clutched it, but perspective opened paths unseen. The words were plain, yet they struck deeper than any weapon, for they mirrored the very message of the first ones. The chamber shifted again, whispers rising, and falling, some voices soft with agreement, others sharp with denial, but none could erase the weight of the truth. The council knew that the galaxy would remember this moment. They knew that their empires would tremble when they heard that the puzzle had been solved not by the proud, not by the mighty, but by a human. The Kalari rose and declared that their people would change, that they would no longer seek dominance through endless machines, but through unity. The Vathan priest declared that their prayers had been answered not by gods, but by humility, and they swore to carry that message to their people. The theory spoke again, saying that patience had been rewarded at last, though not by them, but by one who carried no burden of pride. Yet the Othruan hissed, with fury their voices venom. They swore that they would never bow to such weakness. They swore that humanity would pay for shaming them. The draft spat upon the floor, and declared that the council had been deceived, that the first ones had left traps, not lessons, and that humanity was foolish to believe otherwise. Their voices burned with rage, but even they could not deny what they had seen with their own eyes. The puzzle had opened. The message had been given. The human did not answer their anger. The human only stood calmly before the open device, and said that the choice was theirs, that the message was clear, but what they did with it was not bound by fate. It was bound by their will. They told the council that they could cling to pride and repeat the failures of the past, or they could accept the lesson and step forward into something new. The chamber was silent again, heavy with decision. The Grand Speaker lowered his staff, his eyes dark with bitterness. He declared that the council would need time to decide how to respond, but his voice lacked the certainty it once carried, for he knew, as did they all, that the truth could not be buried, no matter what words they chose. The light from the puzzle began to fade, the symbols drifting away like dust upon the wind, yet the meaning lingered in every mind. The lesson of the first ones was etched into them, whether they wished it or not, and the human turned away from the pedestal, stepping back into the shadows, where they had first been unseen, but never again would they be unseen. The council would never forget, for in that hall of pride and arrogance a human had revealed the hidden message, and in doing so had changed the story of the galaxy forever. The council chamber felt colder now, even as the last glow of the puzzle faded into silence, for the light had left behind something heavier than any weapon. It had left truth, and truth was heavier than pride. Every delegate sat in stillness, their minds turning, their hearts caught between fear and awe. The human had stepped back into shadow, yet even in shadow every eye remained upon them, for none could forget what had happened. The Grand Speaker gripped his staff, his voice low and heavy, as he declared that this meeting would be remembered as long as stars endured, but his words were not filled with triumph. His words were filled with unease, for he knew that history had shifted, and not in favor of the old empires. His voice trembled with bitterness as he admitted that the puzzle was open, that its meaning had been revealed, but he tried to cloak the truth with warnings, saying that the message was dangerous, that the galaxy was not ready to accept such lessons. The Othruan delegate rose at once, their rage burning. They pointed a claw at the human and declared them a threat. They said that a race who could solve what none else could would soon claim power beyond measure. They said that humanity must be watched, must be contained, must be denied the chance to rise, for the galaxy would never survive if such a people grew unchecked. Their voice was filled with fear disguised as fury, and many in the chamber nodded, though uneasily. The draft joined their voices sharp and bitter. They said the human had not earned this moment, that it was chance, nothing more. They spat that humans were reckless, that they would twist the message of the first ones into weapons that would burn worlds. They demanded that the council strip the human of the puzzle's secrets before it was too late. But even as they spoke, their eyes betrayed the truth. They knew the puzzle had chosen not them, not their proud songs, not their endless wisdom, but the human. The Kalari rose slowly, their voices heavy with sorrow. They spoke of their ancestors who had broken themselves against the puzzle, and they admitted that they had been blind, that their pride had blinded them to what was simple. They said that the human had shown what they could not, that humility was greater than power, and they bowed their heads to the human, not in weakness, but in respect. The Vathan priest lifted trembling hands, their voice a whisper filled with hope. They declared that the galaxy had been given a gift, not a curse. They said the human had not stolen anything, they had revealed what was always meant to be revealed. They begged the council to accept the message, to change, to build a future not upon pride, but upon understanding. Their words echoed through the chamber, soft, yet stronger than any shout. The theory delegate added their calm voice, saying that the first ones had left the puzzle as a seed, and that humanity had been the soil in which it bloomed. They said that the galaxy must accept this truth, not resist it, for to resist it would be to deny what their own eyes had seen. The chamber was divided, torn between fear and hope, between hatred and respect. The humans stood silent, letting the storm of voices rise around them. Their face calm, their eyes steady. They did not shout. They did not demand. They only waited. And in their waiting they seemed stronger than all the thunder of the council. The Grand Speaker struck his staff against the floor, the sound booming through the hall. He declared that the council would decide the place of humanity in the order of the galaxy. He declared that the decision would shape the future for ages to come, but his voice was strained, for deep within he knew the decision was no longer his to make. The galaxy had already seen the truth. The humans spoke at last, their voice quiet yet carrying clearly across the chamber. They said they did not come to claim power. They did not come to rule or to boast. They said they came only to understand, and that the puzzle had been a question, not a throne. They told the council that the message was not for humans alone, but for all who would listen. But they warned as well. They warned that if the council clung to pride, if they chose fear instead of truth, then the galaxy would fall again into the same ruin that had swallowed so many before. The words struck the chamber like fire, for they carried no arrogance, only truth, and the truth cut deeper than any blade. The council felt the weight of those words pressing upon their pride, pressing upon their fear, and though many resisted, they could not deny that the puzzle itself had confirmed them. The Othruan hissed and raged, shouting that they would never bow to humans, that their fleets would rise and crush any who tried to place humans above them. But their voice sounded hollow, for their threat could not erase what had been witnessed. The Kalari rose again, saying that perhaps the time of the old powers was ending. Perhaps the galaxy had been waiting for something new, something small yet strong, something human. The whispers grew around the chamber, voices shifting from anger to doubt, from doubt to wonder. And though the council remained divided, one truth was clear: the human was no longer invisible, no longer dismissed as a child of the stars. The human had become the figure upon which every thought now turned. The Grand Speaker lowered his staff, his face carved with bitterness and fear. He declared that the council would not yet decide. He declared that they must watch humanity, see what path they would walk, see whether they would rise as saviors or as destroyers. But his voice lacked the weight of command, for he knew the council could not shape what was already shaping itself. The human bowed their head and stepped back into silence, but the silence no longer hid them. The chamber was filled with eyes that could not look away, whispers of fear, whispers of awe, whispers of respect carried on the air, and though nothing more was said, the meaning was clear: the place of humanity had changed forever. Outside the chamber the stars waited, endless and silent, the galaxy vast and filled with paths yet unseen. But in that moment every race, every empire, every delegate knew that the story of the galaxy would now bend around the species they had once ignored, for the puzzle that had broken civilizations had opened to a human, and the lesson it carried had chosen them as its messenger. The council did not say it aloud, but each of them thought it in the secret chambers of their hearts. If humans could do this, if humans could see what none else could, then what else might they achieve? What else might they awaken? What else might they change? And the thought filled them with both hope and dread. For the first time in the long history of the council, they feared not the puzzle, not the first ones, not even each other. They feared humanity, and yet they also hoped for them. And in that paradox humanity found its place.